Good morning. My name is Bob Hunley, and I serve as the current president of the Virginia School Boards Association, and I am a member of the Hanover County School Board. I would like to thank all of you for the work you are doing as leaders, advocates, and supporters of public education in your divisions. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's conference, VMDO Architects. VMDO has been a great partner to VSBA over the years. Please be sure and stop by their table located out near the registration table. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our healthy snack sponsor, BPA. You can grab a healthy snack at their table near the registration area anytime during our conference today. Today's conference is focused on how school boards make a difference and affect student outcomes. We're very excited to have as our speaker today the always popular and dynamic Phil Gore, Division Director of Leadership Team Services at the Texas Association of School Boards. Please join me in welcoming Phil Gore.
Good morning. Thank you, Bob. Certainly an honor to be here with you this morning, and I've been looking forward to this opportunity for a few months. I was asked to share on some things that were published in a book that I co-edited in 2015, published by Harvard Education Press, and it's all about balanced governance, a sense that we need to be aware of when we might need to behave one way or another way and find the middle way or the true path, if you will. 22 authors contributed to that book, and I have a handful of copies that I'll try to make available at the end of this session, but you can buy it on Amazon if you're interested in this topic and learning more. We want to really dig into this. What is it that school boards do that makes a difference? I began a PhD program in 2010 at the University of Washington in educational leadership and policy studies, and I had expressed concern to my advisor that there just wasn't a lot of research on what school boards do that makes a difference for student outcomes. Her response to me at that time in 2010, Meredith Honig said, "That shouldn't surprise you." But I was already surprised. She said, "That shouldn't surprise you. It's only been the last 15 years we figured out that what principles do makes a difference." Kind of intriguing, this whole idea that, what some have written about in the 80s and 90s about public education, that they call it the education blob. They say that's you, that's me, that's every superintendent in the country is just part of this blob that don't really make any difference. Fortunately, in 2006, there was a very important analysis that was done of educational leadership literature by Waters and Marzano, who were at McREL at the time, based out of Denver, one of the education labs for the Department of Education. They did a meta-analysis of all of the research on school leadership and school outcomes, and they found, in fact, that school leadership, meaning the board and the superintendent, make it a big difference in what happens in the classroom. How many of you all in the room are school board members? We'll start with the big group. Do we have any superintendents or other administrators? Just a handful. We're certainly glad that you're here. And are there others in the room that are not currently a superintendent or an administrator or a school board member? Just some guests and association staff, maybe. We're certainly glad that all of you are here. Sometimes I introduce myself as a recovering school board member. I was a board member in the Seattle area, a suburban, rural area. We were a dairy farm community that got overtaken by nerds when Microsoft boomed. And they had a whole new demographic for those folks. Nerds is not the right word. Many of them are good friends of mine, but I haven't found a better word yet. We called them new rural dwellers. They could come buy a quarter of an acre and have a house and feel like they were living in the country. And as the smell of the dairy farms faded through the years, we had this huge transition in our school district, a real tension, if you will. In fact, it ended us up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, above the fold, a big article on our district and the tension we had around our culminating project from our high school, because we were really driving for academic rigor, but we had a lot of vocationally inclined students and their families living in the community that wanted something much different for their students, their children, than what the Microsoft families wanted. And so it was a fascinating tension to live in. How many of you ever had some tension in your community? Yeah, past tense. Have you ever had in the past? Currently have. Any tension on your school board? No, of course not, right? We're going to talk about some of these things as we go along. You know, tension can be very important. Without tension, a lot of times we're not inclined to improve. We're not inclined to do something different or differently until there's a little bit of tension, until there's a little bit of pressure. And sometimes a certain amount of pressure is a good thing. How many, maybe you've seen in your lifetime a school or a system or a family that was complacent. Everything was just kind of good enough. Well, you've heard perhaps that if you do the same old thing, you'll always get the same results. It's actually not true. I have a car at home that's got 99,000 miles on it. We've been putting gas and oil in it for a while now, and it's actually not doing the same thing that it was doing a couple years ago. So I've come to recognize that when you do the same old thing, you're actually not going to get the same results, but over time you'll get less and less and less. People get tired. Just like a machine, a school system gets tired. It gets tired of what was doing. People become complacent. And actually, we know this through research on teaching effectiveness, that teachers generally have an upward growth trajectory where they do better and better and better for several years, and then they get to a place that they're kind of stagnant and start to decline. Perhaps some of you are current or former school teachers, so I'll be a little careful about what I say. I do recognize that it's possible to revive that, for us to find a renewed energy. Perhaps I'd suggest to you that school boards do something very similar. When we get on the board, we have a lot of energy, we have a lot of enthusiasm, we have something we want to solve. And then we become a part of the system. We transition from that point in time where we're sworn in to the points in time where we're sworn at. And we get a little bit discouraged, if you will, or deflated. And especially when we hear words like, I'll just throw some out. Well, we tried that and it didn't work. Or you don't understand, honey, you've got to be on the board a little bit longer so you understand how we do things. Well, there's a truth to that. But there's a lot of frustration in that first 1, 2, 3 years, right? Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. That first year or two, you got some ideas, you want to bring it forward, but you feel like it's just this horrible uphill battle. People don't necessarily want to hear your ideas. I was a pastor for 20 years when I got on the school board, and I was used to people pretending like they listened to what I said. You know, and it was absolutely fascinating. Of course, the ones that were asleep through the sermon were the first ones to pat you on the back and tell you what a great sermon it was. And after a time, I recognized, well, they got what they needed that morning. But when you think about that, it's like, you know, I got on a school board. I was actually appointed to a vacated seat. First couple of meetings, I had some things to say. I was stunned. No one wanted to listen to anything I had to say. I hadn't yet earned the right to be heard. You would think that because the fellow board members had appointed me, they thought I had something to say. But they didn't. And perhaps I didn't have that much to say, not nearly as much of value as what I thought. So we learn our role as we go along, but I've recognized through the years there's a lot of frustration on school boards. A lot of frustration of brand new members, of veteran members, of superintendents. How do we do this? How do we work together to move things forward? I want to key in on today what it is that school boards do that affects student achievement. What are those things that we know, while no credible researcher will say that the school board caused this to happen, there are some things across the country that we can identify that school boards in improving districts do that are different than school boards in declining districts. There's a set of characteristics, of habits, of behaviors, of mindsets that are different in high-achieving school districts than low-achieving school districts, and we'll get right into that in the next few minutes. On the Post-it note there on your table, I want you to just briefly write a sentence or a phrase, something that you hope to gain from this workshop today. Why did you come to Charlottesville, Virginia today? Charlottesville, Virginia. Yeah, good. I know where I am. I got here a few hours ago. Why did you come to Charlottesville, Virginia today? What do you hope to gain from this workshop? Just write that down on the Post-it note. After you've written something, take a moment just to share at your table. What is it that you hope to gain from the workshop today? I always feel guilty interrupting people having a good conversation, but I know we have to move on. And we definitely want to hear from you, so I'd like for 2 or 3 people, maybe one per table, but not every table. Just let's get a general idea. Samantha's got a microphone there, and if you'd like to say something, what is it that you hope to gain from this session here? And was it Andy? Right. Andy?
Okay.
Do I have to stand up?
They would like for you to.
Oh, all right.
Look at the camera, too. Like.
I suppose I have to smile, too.
No.
Be somber. No.
Yeah.
What I wrote down was I'm looking for an insight. I'm not multiple, an insight on how to get over the impasse with our city council in persuading them that our board matters in how students achieve.
Oh, wow. So you've got some others to convince. Good. That's good. Yours may be one of the easier outcomes we can meet. Because really, it's a matter of handing you some research and pointing you to some studies that you can put in their face and say, look, we do too matter. Somebody else. What do you hope to gain from our time together today?
Randy, you did good.
All the way in the back.
You did good. You did.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I think I came to how to continue making education more appealing and effective in our system.
Okay. How to continue making education more appealing in our system. And there was another word in there.
Effective.
Great. Sam wants one more. We probably need a lady to speak now. It's ladies' turn.
Ladies' night. Ladies.
We got one up front here, if no other volunteers. Thank you. What do you hope to gain from this workshop today?
I would like to know how school boards can better engage in problem solving.
How school boards can better engage in problem solving. I think I've got a deal for you. There's one key theme that you'll pull right out of this. As he said, an insight. One other before we move on. I'd like for one person at each table to collect those Post-it notes, if you will, and come lay them up here on this table. Don't stack them together, but let them be spread out.
Oh, no.
And we'll try to pull some of those in as we go along.
Did somebody take my name? Oh, maybe. I'm sorry.
I want to ensure that this workshop is just not abstract. It's not about a bunch of theory, things that I learned in a doctoral program or read in a book, but that it's practical, and so that you can apply something. It's not just about the head knowledge, it's about what actions we take, and we'll get into that as we go along. This is a quote that was in a little book published by, what's the guy's name? Good to Great. Jim Collins. So it's a little book published by Jim Collins because he wrote a chapter that the publishers refused to include in Good to Great. Seriously. He wrote a little chapter, some of you have heard of this, no doubt. It's called Good to Great in the Social Sectors. And in that, he calls it a monolith. I believe it's either 36 or 37 pages. In that little booklet of Good to Great in the Social Sectors, he basically opens it up and says, you know all that stuff I told you in Good to Great? It doesn't quite work that way in the social sector. When you don't get to weed out the ones that you don't want to, in our case, educate, when you don't get to weed out the families that are not fully engaged in the system, when you don't get to weed out those that have disabilities, those that have impediments or challenges to their learning, it's a little different than the business sector. He explains that when profit is not the bottom line, but results and effectiveness are the bottom line, it's a whole different paradigm. Now, you can imagine why the publishers didn't want to publish that in the book Good to Great. Good to Great's a fabulous book. How many people in the room have read it or read parts of it? Yeah, it's a great book, right? And at the end of that book, in the end of this little chapter that the publishers wouldn't publish, Jim Collins quotes Peter Drucker as having said, "The foundation of doing good is doing well." Folks, as a school trustee, school board member, when we do our job well, that's the best case we can make for our relevance, our importance, and the impact that we have on children. It's not just about telling legislators, congressmen, this is what you need to do. It's about doing our job well, right? Advocacy has its place. It's important. I recognize that. We need to share our accomplishments, but that starts with having accomplishments to share. So I want to arm you with a few things that you can work with as you go along. Now this character who was president of the Fordham Foundation, I want you to read this quote if you can see it. Can everybody see it? I will read it for you. This character, just a few years ago, is on record as having said, "The local school board, especially the elected kind, is an anachronism and an outrage. We can no longer pretend it's working well or hide behind the mantra of local control of education. We need to steel ourselves to put this dysfunctional arrangement out of its misery and move on to something that will work for children." Checker Finn, Undersecretary for Education a few years back, has been an adamant antagonist of locally elected school boards. Why would I share this in a workshop like this? To point out very plainly, we have our critics. There are plenty of critics. Remember, it was about that same year, it might have been 2010, the Atlantic, the cover page was, the cover photo was, "First kill all the school boards." There are plenty of people in higher ed and in policy making and in DC that believe this would be a wonderful solution that would improve opportunities for kids. Intriguingly, and I'll segue to the next slide, the Fordham Foundation finally looked at some research on school boards and their possible effects on student outcomes. And in spring of 2014, they published this paper. It's called "Does School Board Leadership Matter?" I would encourage you to write that down, do a Google search. It'll pop right up. The author's name, it's on your website. Okay, just go to the VSBA website. This article published by the Fordham Foundation was a review of a national survey of school board members, what they do, what they don't do, and then comparison with student achievement outcomes in their district. The Fordham Foundation in 2014, just 3 years later, came to the conclusion that, you know what? Not all school boards are bad. Some of them actually might be doing good. And they came to this conclusion and said, we need to look at this much closer. This needs to be studied by scholars, but it also needs to have attention by voters, parents, taxpayers, and other policymakers. What is happening, again, in high-achieving school districts where boards are actually adding to the opportunities for children, as opposed to low-achieving districts where boards may, in fact, be contributing to the problems. And so this is a really important quote that's in that study you can find on the VSBA website. I'm suggesting to you this morning that school boards make a difference when they're elevating perspectives on governance, their governance capacity, and their actions align. We can't look at everything under the sun today, although we're going to cover a whole lot of different things as we go along. I want to key in on these three areas in particular: perspectives, capacity, and action. Your perspectives matter. There's other words for perspectives. I'm going to have you think about this and write in just a minute on some perspectives that may be important for a school board to have, a school board member to have. Your perspectives about what is possible, your general philosophy, your outlook, your approach to life matters when it comes to the student achievement in your district. Ultimately, your capacity to govern, your knowledge, your understanding, your skill, and your will to work, to do the work, has an effect on student outcomes. This all connects to the actions that we take. It's not just a perspective, a belief that's out here in isolation and we can write something down and say, oh yes, I believe all of our teachers can teach. No, it has to be embedded in the work that we do, in the policies that we adopt, in the practices that we take, and very importantly, in our resource alignment. So we'll talk as we go along about perspectives and why they're important. We'll talk about capacity. This morning, we'll be working to help improve capacity. We'll be working to expand knowledge, understanding, and hopefully motivation to act. As we think about that, ultimately it is the action. It's not just the theory, it's not just the thinking about it, it's not just imagining, but it's in the doing where children can have a better future. This idea, and I'll back up, they're all kind of interwoven. Your perspectives will drive the type of knowledge and skills that you're looking for. Your knowledge and skills will affect the actions that you can take. It behooves us as school board members, and this is why you're here today, is to improve our knowledge, our understanding and skills, and to sharpen our capacity to have better action that's most effective for students and engaging them. I want to draw your attention to this action planning guide. This is just a tool, it's just a piece of paper. It's something that I hope that all of you will write something on. So do me a favor and start by writing your name on this somewhere, maybe at the top. You might even write your district name. This kind of helps ground your thinking a little bit. You might even write something else toward the top or in the margin. Maybe it's a problem that you're trying to solve or address in your school district. Maybe it's a teacher that is important to you for some reason, some connection, a relative, a friend, or someone that's doing excellent work or someone that's struggling. Maybe ultimately, though, you would also write some student's name. I'm intrigued when I work with boards in their development and ask the question, how are the students doing in your district? Some board members can just speak right to it. They know the data. They know not only the current reality, but they know the programs that are in place for improvement. Other board members just look at you with a blank face. Or they say, okay, I guess. Or one chronically underperforming district that I was working with one evening with a member of our Superintendent's Association, I asked this question, how are the students doing in your district? They just looked at me. I asked the question again about 20 minutes later. This board member who'd been on the board for 15 to 20 years, he responded and said, well, I guess they're doing okay. In fact, my grandson's probably out there playing baseball right now if it's not raining too hard. That was the answer. You know, if you hammer on a rock enough times, you don't have to hit it real hard. You just keep hitting it over and over and over. Eventually something breaks. The third time, about 20, 30 minutes later, I asked the question simply, just very straightforward, open-ended though, how are the students doing in your district? The superintendent spoke up. He said, well, actually not so well. Only 9% of our students passed the math portion of our state test this last year. 9%. Now, what was concerning to me most was not that only 9% of their students had passed the state assessment in math, but to the best of my knowledge, not one board member around the table had any clue and certainly had no sense of urgency about it. Did I mention this was a chronically underperforming school district? Ironically, a friend of mine that was going to school with me at the same time, She had said, you know, when I moved to this state 30 years ago, my father-in-law was a superintendent in such and such district, and I had a job offer in that district, and my father-in-law said, oh, you wouldn't want to go there. Those students don't perform well. And here we were 30 years later with this kind of chronically embedded culture of lack of performance. There's something wrong with that. I want you to take just a moment, and in this area of perspectives, write one thing that you think is important when it comes to improving student achievement that is a perspective a board member might have or a board might have. What's a perspective or an outlook that might be related to student achievement in a school district? And then let's go ahead and go to that next box. When it comes to capacity, what's something here on the left-hand side, before we delve into this, what's a knowledge, an understanding, a skill, or a will or motivation that might be important that school board members have that relates to student outcomes? What's a knowledge or skill that you need? Those of you that have been on the board for a while, you may have an easier time at this, but what's a knowledge or skill that you need or that you have needed in the past that's made a difference in your governance decisions? Your governance. What's something you needed to know? What's a skill you needed to have? That third area, action. What's an action that you as a board member or your board has taken that you believe has had an effect on student achievement? What's an action you've taken? So again, in this workshop today, we're talking about perspectives, the beliefs, attitudes, assumptions, the values, how those affect our capacity, our knowledge, our understanding, our skills, and our will, and how that drives our action. When we think about action, we're talking about engaging, deliberating, deciding, monitoring. What is it that we do, physically, mentally do, that contributes to improved outcomes for students? First of all, we're going to say that your perspectives matter. For those of you that can see the screen well, what do you see in the picture? Some see an island. It is like an island, and it's the tip of an iceberg. What do we know about icebergs? There's a lot more underneath than what is up above the waterline. What we see is the outward results. What you see for results in your students are things like graduation rates, college acceptance rates, attendance rates, student achievement test score rates, percentages, quartiles. What we see is those outward results, but the internal perspectives drive the outward results. In fact, without the huge pile of stuff beneath the surface, there wouldn't be anything sticking up above the surface, right? That's what props it all up. Beliefs about student learning, attitudes toward students, attitudes toward staff, attitudes toward the community. All these things within the system that are partly the responsibility of board members, but also the superintendent, other administrators, teachers, parents, the greater community, the students. All of these internal things, the drive that may be there or not be there, right? All of those internal things that you don't necessarily see, they contribute to the outward results. I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes here about 4 perspectives that I think are extremely important. These are not the only list. In fact, I've already asked you to write down one on your paper, a perspective that you think is important. But I want to talk to you about trust, about curiosity, about a forward focus, and about possibilities. 4 areas: trust, curiosity, forward focus, and possibilities. First of all, on the subject of trust, Stephen M.R. Covey, Covey's son, has done some excellent writing in the last 10 years, some research and writing on the importance of trust. He wrote one book that's called The Speed of Trust, and the research that he found when studying large companies across the U.S. was that the more people trusted each other, the faster things got done. When things get done in a company faster, that also means they get done less expensively. We all know this in our personal relationships. When I first got married, I was just a kid. I've been married almost 32 years. I had just turned 21. I just almost gave my age away. Like there'd be any doubt with the gray hair that I'm at least 50-something. I have 2 grown daughters. See? When I first got married, literally on my honeymoon, second day, a very strange occurrence. My wife and I are driving through the redwoods in Northern California, this beautiful area where they filmed one of those Star Wars movie scenes, and some of you are familiar with that, these 300 to 400 feet tall redwood trees, some of them large enough you could make a tunnel and drive a car through. They're just spectacular. We're on this windy road. My wife decides to change her top. That's no big deal, right? We're the only ones on the road. We're just a country road. And we go around, and we get around the curve, and I see this sign, and it simply says, men working. What did I say? Pull your shirt down. What did my wife say? Why are you yelling at me? Well, I didn't think I was yelling. I was a little loud. I did have a little sense of urgency, and maybe it wouldn't have been the end of the world to, flash some road workers. It really wouldn't have hurt anybody, I don't think, but I just thought she might want to pull her shirt down. It wasn't a good day. That was day 2. Now, I'd like to think that 32 years later, if I were to say to my wife, pull your shirt down, loudly, she'd just pull her shirt down, and, well, that could go bad too, right? It's not the best choice of words. The point that I was trying to make was when we don't have relationship with people, or much relationship, trust is low. We're uncertain. Right? We don't know them. We don't know that they have our best intentions at heart. When we first got on the school board, most of us, people didn't listen to us. Why? They didn't know us. They didn't know our motives. In fact, I don't know about you, but for the first couple years on the board, the superintendent said to me multiple times, we're still trying to figure out what your agenda is. I didn't realize I was supposed to have one. Yeah, get rid of him. It certainly might have been one of his concerns. I didn't know I was supposed to have an agenda. But people are wondering. In fact, the more that we call attention to something, the more people get concerned that that's our agenda. And it's kind of this catch-22, right? How do you lead change? How do you move improvement when the more you talk about something, the less people want to hear it? Or the more inclined they are to distrust you? Trust is critical for everything. It's foundational for respect. It's foundational for the way we communicate. But most importantly, not just what we say, but how it's received. In a low-trust environment, people will take whatever we say. You're just saying that because of this. Anybody ever heard anything like that? You're just saying that because of that. It's like, really? Trust is important. It's an important perspective. Another ingredient, if you will, that's very important is curiosity, and they kind of go hand in hand. We're going to talk later this morning after the break about questions, about how to frame a good question. When we're genuinely curious, and the other people we're working with can accept that we're genuinely curious, we can accomplish a lot of things together. But if we're accusatory, and it's the same words many times, right? If we're accusatory, why is this happening, right? Versus, why is this happening? It's such a subtle difference. It's our affect, if you will. It's things that we're not even obviously aware of most of the time. But what's going on in our heart? Are we curious? How are the boys doing? How are the girls doing? How are our African American students doing? How are our English language learners doing? If we're curious about how our students are doing and we're able to frame questions out of curiosity, we can have an opportunity for all of us to grow together. But when we approach the subject with, we've got to do something about this third grade English language learner group, right? It's like, okay, where can we go with that? Who's going to argue? Well, yeah, we need to do something, right? But the curiosity of how do we get there? Curiosity is really fundamental for human relationships and for improving school governance. We need to be curious. It's our job to be curious. It's our job to ask questions. It may be the most important lever that we have as an elected school board member is the power of the question. The power of the question. But if the question is perceived as accusatory, derogatory, belittling, it just doesn't go anywhere. There's a young lady recently got elected to a large urban school board in the state of Texas. She is a force to be reckoned with. African American, defense attorney, children's defense attorney. She is intense. Olympic athlete. She is a force to be reckoned with. She's about my height. And when she stands, she stomps her feet. And she will let you know she's got something to say. And she is brilliant. And the challenge that she has, I'm trying to be a little careful because I suspect some of you may know her. But the challenge that she has is to get 3 or 4 other people on her board to care in the same ways about the same things that she cares about so that she can move an agenda forward. And the challenge we all have is very similar. When we approach things as we're going to pounce on it and solve it, it's hard to get friends to come on board and say, yes, how can I help you with that? Curiosity is the key that will unlock that opportunity, that will build relationships in personal lives as well as our school governance lives. When we're curious, people will lean in with us. We'll say just a little bit more about that later. Forward focus. What do you see in this picture? What do you see in the picture? A road. What else do you see? A mirror, a rear view mirror. What else do you see? An odometer, a dashboard. What's that? Maybe some poor driving. Absolutely. The speedometer is up there in the higher end of things. In the middle of the road. There's a reason why the picture is fuzzy. It's blurry. When you go 140, the picture's blurry. Right? What else do you see? Anything? There's something in the distance. We're not sure what it is. It's very important in our role as a board member to have a forward focus. There is in this frame a rear view mirror. And what percentage of the frame does the rear view mirror take up? Small. 10% maybe, at the most. Probably not even 10%. If we were to measure that, I need to do that, don't I? Measure that and know what percentage, maybe 2%, 3%. What will happen if you're trying to drive down the road and stare in the rearview mirror? Maybe some of us have put on eyeshadow or shaved while looking in the rearview mirror trying to drive, right? None of you have ever done that. Higher insurance premiums. There's a result. There's a consequence. Yes. Maybe some flashing blue lights or red ones. Maybe we make other people nervous, right? We can't drive forward well while we're staring in the rearview mirror. I think this is paramount for public education today. Every single one of us in this room, we went to school someday. And we have a memory of what it was like when we went to school. And we were all lined up in that agricultural model, like rows of corn, our desk just neatly arranged. We had a very top-down model where the teacher talked at us for hours. And if we were talking with someone next to us, even if it was to say, can I borrow your pencil or your eraser, Next thing you know, the teacher was right there alongside of us trying to straighten us out or whack us with a ruler. Or hopefully none of you had Mrs. Smith who kicked me in the shin one day. She thought I deserved it. My parents thought otherwise. Just glad she doesn't teach anymore. But we all have a memory of what it was like when we were in school, and that memory can be a problem for us. It can cause us to imagine, and all of you in this room, if you have bonds, you go out for bonds and levies to your community, you ask for payments to help construct schools. Y'all do that in Virginia? Some do, some don't, all right? Anybody ever heard a community member say, there's nothing wrong with that school, that was good enough for when I went there? 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, my hometown, they take decades to build a new school after the building's condemned. Because so many people live in that community and never move anywhere else, and it's good enough. It's good enough. Folks, hear this today. Maybe you've heard something similar before, but hear this. We're not preparing kids for our past. We're preparing them for their future, which is not yet envisioned. The average student today will have 5 or 6 careers in their lifetime. Futurists believe that most of those careers have not yet been thought of. My son, who's 23 years old, is doing an internship this summer with a company called EA. Anybody in the room young enough to know what EA is? 7, 8 of you? I know it's not just about age. It's some video game thing. So something that, you know, kids sitting around playing with those toys all day are wasting their time, wasting their energy. They're all getting overweight. They're all having trouble. They're all mushing out their brain. They're never going to have a future. That's what I was thinking 10 years ago. What is wrong with you, son? What is the matter with you? He just got this internship this summer with, is it electronic arts, games? I guess people make millions of dollars doing those things. Billions. Like there's music and there's programming and there's graphics and there's all the packaging and all this stuff. And there's $1 billion industry in video games. I never saw it coming. I never saw it coming. Fortunately for our son, his mother thought that there might be a future there. Right? Forward focus, we're preparing kids for a future that we don't know yet. And this interweaves with this perspective of possibilities. Are we able to think about what is possible? Not just what was possible for us, not just what those around us have been able to achieve, but are we able to think about what is possible for each and every child that may be completely different than anything we've ever imagined? Perspectives, beliefs, attitudes, values, assumptions. Talk at your table just for a minute or two. What is another perspective other than these 4 that I've mentioned of trust, curiosity, forward focus, and possibilities? What's another perspective that's important for effective school board work? We heard the word collaboration. What's another perspective? Just share out from your table. Gino, bring you a microphone.
Okay, we had 2 perspectives that are similar. One is all means all, and the other is that all people deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, especially students.
Nice.
All means all was the first one.
All means all, and all people, especially students, deserve to be treated with respect.
Right, and dignity.
And dignity. Thank you for that. Somebody else. There's 1 or 2 more.
They're volunteers. I know they are.
We felt that openness to other ideas, other
Nice.
perspectives, sometimes to our own mistakes is a really important part of being able to move forward.
Similar but different than curiosity is just openness. Can I even listen to someone else? And a wider scope and maybe a higher level. I think one of the challenges I had as a board member was being able to think at a higher level of the whole system rather than my kids or my kids' friends or my kids' classroom or teachers, but being able to think of the whole system. I want you to take a moment and write on that little orange dot. You're going to have to write small. This prompt is intentionally vague. What percentage of the students in your district are at or above grade level? On the next piece, we want you to write the percentage of students in your district that are capable of achieving at or above grade level. What percentage of your students could you expect to be at or above grade level? And then come put that up here on the chart on the right. How many in the room have done an exercise something like this before? Somewhere. Was it at a conference somewhere, or maybe at an VSBA conference or somewhere else? I'm just curious, on this one here, the percentage of students that are currently at or above grade level, it's a very normal distribution. You're ending up here with a mode, if you will, of about 75% that are currently at or above grade level, which, if that's accurate for the state of Virginia as a whole, that's probably higher than most states that are at or above grade level. You're ending up with a strong concentration here, predominantly between 90 and 100% that could be at or above grade level. Now, we didn't clarify any specific measure of why you would choose what you chose. So real quickly from a couple people, what measure, what did you have in mind when you chose 75, 80%, whatever you put here on the left? What measure was in your mind of that? Gina's got the mic.
I used the tiered support system, how many students were in Tier 1, how many in Tier 2, Tier 3.
Okay, tiered support system. What data, what information were you basing this on?
Literacy and literacy rates and grade and graduation rates.
Literacy rates and graduation rates, 75, 80%. Any other measures that you had in mind that might be completely different than that? So for those of you that are in this 80 to 90% on the right, which is almost everybody, why did you say 100%? Somebody that would say 100% of your students could be expected to be at or above grade level. Yes, sir.
Because we believe every child can learn and can be taught in a way so that they can achieve.
Okay. Hopefully everybody heard that. He believes every child can learn. Yep, and we got a light hand of applause in the back on that, just in case you didn't hear it. People, we know this from human nature. We know this from our own experience, our own kids, people around us. People will rise or fall to our level of expectation. Students will rise or fall to our level of expectation. For those of you that maybe said 80%, would you be willing to say why you would say 80% instead of 100? Maybe it had to do with the way the question was asked. Gina, there's a lady behind you there.
So I'll stick my neck out because I'm not with the school district. I think we are societally conditioned to say 100% for the reasons that have been stated, and I agree with the concept. But I think sometimes if we say 100% at or above grade level, we're actually making failures of students who are succeeding. Perhaps they have an IEP, perhaps they have some condition that means that they can't achieve to that somewhat arbitrary benchmark, and we need to moderate those benchmarks to still challenge, to still have high expectations, but to acknowledge realities.
Okay, so maybe there's some realities. I mean, let's just let that set in, and the gentleman here wants to add something.
Well, grade level is an arbitrary thing, and what happens is as student performance achieves, the benchmark for on grade level keeps going up. So if you use a mean, a bell curve and say grade level is here, you're always going to have some people below and some people above. But if you say some base line, all students can get over a baseline. But
let me point to the gap that's here, that you all are saying 75, maybe 75 to 80% of your students are currently at or above grade level, but you're all as a collective saying that all of your students, 90 to 100%, could be at or above grade level. How do we explain what could be, how that's so different than what is? What will be necessary in your school district if 75% of students are at or above grade level for close to 100% of them to be at or above grade level? What would have to change?
Okay, so full disclosure, I've been on the board for 25 years. And when I started the board, minority achievement was so low that I was embarrassed. Graduation came. I never saw an African-American student walk across the stage to get an honorary scholarship or anything. Here it is 25 years later, and the test scores, in some cases, they surpass the majority. And when I go to graduations, there's about 50% of honor students on the stage. And it was to the point that I couldn't complain anymore at the school board meetings. And so I took the time out to really commend the system, because something happened that caused this big shift of achievement in an environment that I was the main person standing up complaining for years and years and years. What has to be done? But I know how often we had to fight with City Council for more funding for the right programs to provide the support for those children who were unable to succeed. We stopped saying that if your parents aren't involved, you're not going to achieve. We had mentors, people in the community that came together to make it happen. So I firmly believe that we could reach the 100% mark if we have the resources, the funding, the support of the community, all of those check marks and benchmarks, and everyone working together to make it happen.
Excellent. Yep, you're going to get a hand. Can I get a copy of that portion of the video? I want to come to your board meeting when you say, we got to do something about these white kids and their achievement, right? I want to be there, right? That is awesome. Thank you for that. And it's kind of hard. I want to share a quick video, a few seconds.
So what difference does exceptional governance make for students? It means that it provides no limits for students. It means that you're going to provide countless academic opportunities for all students within the district. That exceptional governance means that regardless of where those students come from, it doesn't matter what their background is, social status, all things are possible for those students, because exceptional governance means you're putting students first versus the wants of the adults, and understanding that you're going to make and invest in their future, period.
One thing, before we go to the break, we're going to get into this case study to introduce it. I want us to begin to talk about Apple Valley School District, and we're going to use it as a platform to build some skills upon as we go along. In the Lighthouse Research Study, which took place from about 1998 until around 2012, a multi-state study looking at what do school boards do that might relate to student outcomes, one of the paramount findings in this study was that in low-achieving school districts, people don't believe students can learn. And in high-achieving school districts, they believe that they can learn. And it becomes kind of a conundrum, a chicken and an egg thing. Like, did the beliefs come first and then the learning? Or was the learning there so people believed? What was it? What inspired that dream, that motivation to say that all students can learn? I was a part of this research project for several years when I was the director of board development in the state of Washington. And we did surveys. There are thousands and thousands of surveys that have been collected across the country from board members, superintendents, other administrators, and teachers. Out of those three groups, which group had the highest beliefs about what was possible for student learning? Administrators, teachers, or school board members? Teachers had the lowest. And if you talk with a teacher about this, you'll find some verification of what we were finding in the research data. The day in, day out experience with students, their families, their situations, the stress of their job, keeps teachers suppressed in their beliefs about students. Most teachers. There's exceptions, right? Administrators were fairly high. Board members were a little bit higher. More removed from the classroom. More removed from the day in and day out. It made it that much more important, and we studied this over a decade and a half, it made it that much more important that board members have high beliefs about what is possible when it comes to student learning. Because what we tracked over time, as the board members' beliefs about what was possible improved, the administrators and the teachers' beliefs about what was possible improved. Because the board members began to articulate an expectation that student learning would improve. And as we did that, student learning improved, but everybody's beliefs about what was possible also improved. Mary Delagardelle, the primary researcher in this study, she just passed away late last summer. I hope to share a video of her after the break with you, just a few minutes, as she processes some thinking. What were they thinking about on this topic? Mary categorized board member, administrator, and teacher beliefs as either stuck or moving. Let me give you an example of a stuck belief. Students can achieve here if they work hard enough. Now there's the little two-letter word in the middle that's the crux here. In low-achieving school districts, there's always an if. We'll get to that. On the other hand, in a moving or an achieving school district, all students will achieve here because we are committed to ensuring they do. These are real statements from board members in the surveys. Students can achieve here if they work hard enough. Maybe a true statement, but it's a whole different perspective. All students will achieve here because we are committed to ensuring they do. Grab this piece of paper that has beliefs at the top. I want you to individually, very quickly, just give you a minute or two to do this. Read the statement, identify whether this is an example of a moving or a stuck statement, and then we'll debrief it together. There's just 12 statements. These came directly from surveys of folks participating in the Lighthouse research. Is that an example of a moving or a stuck statement that goes with a moving or a stuck school district? Let's take a look at number 2. A family's level of income is used as an excuse. We can't do that. Sometimes people say the poor kids have limits. I say all kids have limits. I believe we have not reached the limits of any of our kids in the system, including the poor children. Is that moving or stuck?
That's moving.
That's moving. That's moving. Yep. Everybody's got limits, but we've not reached the limits of any of our kids. So number 2, I believe that any student can learn if they want to learn and are prepared to learn. Parents just need to do a better job. Stuck. All children might not be able to learn, but surely everyone can learn to behave.
Stuck.
That one's a little too easy. If parents were doing what they're supposed to be doing, we wouldn't have any problems. They need to turn off the TV and read.
Stuck.
Very stuck. It's amazing what kids can do if we ask them. We need to do a better job educating our children. Moving or stuck? Moving. We have different personalities on the board, but we are focused on one thing, the kids. Moving. How can you hold teachers accountable for student improvements in academics? When dealing with human beings, there's not much you can do about accountability. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Very stuck. Sounds like your dad. We do everything we can for every child who comes through our doors. Moving. You can only improve bottom up. My contention is a student is in middle school. If a student is in middle school and can't read, you probably have lost the student. We spend too many resources on remediation. Very stuck. There's just too damn much staff development. Yeah, very stuck. Number 11. Moving or stuck? Mary used to just love this one. Well, you know, what do the parents do? They got the good kids locked up in the closet at home. Send you all their problems, keep the good ones at home. We don't let go of reading at 4th or 5th grade. We're stressing learning to read even in the middle school. Moving or stuck? Moving. Very moving. These are real examples, folks. These are things that school board members across the U.S. have written in survey responses. I've asked Bob to come and read the case study for us.
The district. Apple Valley is a district of 6,500 students with one high school. The student population in Apple Valley is about 60% minority and 58% economically disadvantaged. The district and community retain the look and feel of a small town in a rural area, even though the district is only 75 miles from a major city. Of the 7 members of the school board, 2 joined the board in the past year, and the other 5 have served for 3 to 16 years. The superintendent has served the district for the past 7 years. The history. For several years, the board has been concerned with the academic achievement of its economically disadvantaged students, and similarly, its minority students. The gap between these student groups and the Anglo population is especially high in secondary math. 3 years ago, the board established a district goal to eliminate this achievement gap. Still, each year, the board finds that the gap remains largely unchanged. Last year, the board set a superintendent performance goal for increasing student achievement in secondary math among economically disadvantaged students. Although they believe that economic conditions contributed to this issue, they wanted to see the gap reduced by 25%. When the results came in, the decrease in the gap was slight, largely because of declining achievement by Anglo students. However, the superintendent met all other goals and expectations to the board's satisfaction and received an excellent achievement rating on his evaluation. The latest. In its most recent state academic achievement report, the district met standard in all 4 categories reported in the accountability system. However, one of its 2 middle schools failed to meet the targets for 2 of the categories, student achievement and closing achievement gaps, and was designated improvement required by the state accountability system. The high school was dangerously close to failing to meet the same 2 targets and receiving the IR label. Because of this, the district was also edging close to being rated IR as a whole. When the board drilled down on its state report, the most notable reason for the high school status was low achievement among students in Algebra 1, especially economically disadvantaged students. This had been a trend for many years. The reaction. As the board reviewed the report, several members repeated their complaint that a number of math teachers were proposed for contract renewal each year, even though the superintendent was aware of the repeated complaints from parents about these teachers. One board member, to the acclaim of his colleagues, said he wanted to see performance appraisals for all of the secondary math teachers. He also wanted to know what percentage of the students in each teacher's classes had failed to meet standards on the state exam in math or Algebra 1 in past years. When the superintendent asked why he wanted this information, the board member said he expected to see heads roll. A second board member said she expected to see the good teachers assigned to low-performing classes from this point. Other board members who had children in middle school were distinctly uncomfortable with this idea. One of these board members suggested instead that the district consider giving bonuses to the teachers in these classes if their students made substantial improvement over the previous year. Another board member announced that she would refuse to vote for a contract renewal for the district's math coordinator. The board president, in an effort to shift the conversation from individuals to systems, raised a general question of what, if anything, the board could do to ensure the appraisal process was weeding out weak instructors, which he noted clearly had not been the case. He also suggested the board consider developing a clear student achievement standard that would constitute a reason for non-renewal if not met. The superintendent noted that secondary math positions were hard to fill and reminded the board that a number of relatively new, promising teachers had left the district in recent years to take higher-paying positions in nearby communities. One veteran and well-respected board member who had been quiet during the discussion asked the superintendent to help the board understand what steps the administration had already taken to address the problem and what the results had been.
Thank you, Bob. Folks, there's a lot that's going on in this school district. Take just a moment before we break and circle or write in the margins what evidence of perspectives did you see within here? What were the perspectives? The board member that says heads will roll, what is that? What perspective is that related to? What perspective is there here that gives the superintendent an excellent rating when they're not meeting this overarching goal? What's a perspective in the wisdom of this last veteran board member that speaks up? What do you see there? Take just a minute to make a few notes. What do you see happening in this district? There are three governance studies that I want you to be very familiar with. They are interrelated. They're foundational for the things that I'm talking with you about. They're each one reported in my book that I mentioned earlier. In this document that's in your packet, Capacity Building for Exceptional Governance, these three studies are outlined. I'm going to go over them with you kind of quickly. The first is by Dr. Tom Alsbury. Tom found in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, did a study in another state, found that school boards can harm student achievement, that there's a link. And what Tom defined in his study as politically motivated turnover. So that is somebody in the community gets upset with the school board, they get upset enough, whether it's a teachers union, whether it's a faith group, a community group, a mom's group, whatever kind of group. But there's what he defined as politically motivated turnover. When that happens, it destabilizes the board, results in negative outcomes for kids. Tom went on to a university in Iowa and became a professor there, and he had a student his very first year as a professor. Her name is Mary Delagardelle. Mary was a principal in one school district and a board member in another. And at her time, she was inquiring into what is different about school boards in high-achieving districts than boards in low-achieving districts. Mary had Tom as a professor her very first year in her doctoral studies, and she literally met him in the aisle of the classroom one day after session and said, Tom, if school boards could do this much harm, couldn't they also do good? That birthed the Iowa Lighthouse Research Study. And that study is foundational for literally everything that is looked at in school governance today. If you do a Google Scholar search for articles on school governance, Mary's dissertation and following studies are the most often studies of anyone looking at school governance. The third study I want you to be familiar with, it was done by Ivan Lawrenson and Bill McCaw. In Washington State, back in about 2009, I developed a board self-assessment for school boards to self-assess based on the framework of the Lighthouse study. How are we doing as a board? We hired a statistics firm to do the validation of the survey and verify that it was in fact asking the questions that we wanted it to ask and that it was aligned. And they did the validation for us, and Ivan, through his curiosity in school governance, he was a 20-year school board member in Charlottesville, Montana. Ivan was in a doctoral program, and one of his professors, William McCaw, have co-authored this work that they have been doing now in 2 states and beginning to do in 2 others. What boards say they do versus how are the students doing in their district. And so when I talk about Ivan and Bill's work, it's very specific actions that the board takes that are directly related to student learning outcomes. In chapter 1 in our book is some of Mary's finest writing on the Iowa Lighthouse study. It's kind of a summary of the things that she did. And Tom, as a co-editor here, he's got a lot of writing all the way through it, but specifically in chapter 5, talks about the destabilizing effect of politically motivated turnover. And Tom has since kind of delved into what specifically are those behaviors, attributes of a destabilizing board member. What does that look like, and how does that relate then to decrease in student learning? Tom wrote chapter 5 in here. Ivan and Bill wrote chapter 4, which is a summary of their findings, first in Montana, but as I said, they're expanding that to multiple other states. They're finding a little different correlation from one state to the next, maybe related to the way the state tests are done. It may also be related to the culture in the state and the things that they're talking about. I just finished a dissertation in March of 2016. I was sharing with Superintendent Peter here at the break. I was looking at what are the factors and sources of information that school boards consider when they evaluate a superintendent. So right at that intersection of where all the public policy comes to public school administration, that intersection of the board-superintendent relationship, and in particular, the process of evaluation, what are we really thinking? What are we thinking about? What is informing us when we evaluate a superintendent? In my findings, it was very intriguing, a statewide study in the state of Washington. Different regions had different levels of importance that they placed on student learning and student learning outcomes. As much of a gap of like 60% of school board members in one region found student achievement data to be very important when evaluating the superintendent. 100% of school board members in another region found student achievement data to be very important when evaluating a superintendent. It lets me know that regionally, there's a different conversation going on. And it would probably behoove some of you, leadership in the association and staff, to take a look at that from east to west, north to south. What are the different conversations about student learning, about the board's role in student outcomes, and how is that affecting student outcomes? These 3 studies really are kind of foundational that I had up there a minute ago, and that's why they're elaborated a little bit on this sheet. I had an exercise in here that I'm not going to have you do together, but you might do it independently. I was selecting what was the difference between a knowledge and a skill on these studies and on these findings. What was a knowledge, something that a person simply needed to learn, and what was a skill that trustees need to be able to develop in order to be an effective school board member? This is a picture of Tom speaking at a conference we had this last fall. Again, Tom's emphasis as a school administrator and in a doctoral program had been, it seems like school boards can cause a lot of trouble. Have you noticed that that's possibility maybe in other districts than yours? Us rural board members, we say it's in those large urban districts, and the urban board members say the problems those rural districts, right? There's always a little bit of finger pointing. But Tom found that, in fact, school boards can affect negatively student achievement outcomes. What he has outlined, and he's studied multiple districts all over the country now, is that when board member behavior is bad, What's an example of bad board member behavior? Anybody? An unprofessional meeting, not showing up to the meeting, being not prepared. There's nothing more discouraging to an administrator and his or her staff than to watch a board member opening the packet when they walk into the board meeting and sit down, right? And then they ask stupid questions. Don't look at me and think there's not such a thing as a stupid question. I've asked a whole lot of them. A stupid question, I wish I had a more professional word for stupid, but I don't. A stupid question is an uninformed question, something we should have already known, in this case, if we'd have just read the packet. That kind of behavior results in board turnover. And board turnover results in superintendent turnover. When superintendents change, policies change, practices change, other personnel changes. Large urban districts in general in the country have an absolute blight and epidemic of not being able to keep superintendents, by and large, the majority of them. Folks, I like to say, especially when I'm not in my home state, if you've had 5 superintendents in the last 5 years, you don't have a superintendent problem. You have a board problem. And it wouldn't even have to be quite that strong, would it? If you've had 3 superintendents in the last 5 years, you don't have a superintendent problem, you have a board problem. It behooves you to figure that out, get your act together, and turn over a new leaf, right? Because every time you churn through superintendents, you churn through other senior staff, and it results in a direct decline in student achievement, especially the most challenged student populations. So the populations that are already most fragile, that are hard to serve, hard to keep going, you all know this, you get an initiative in place and it starts to gain some momentum. It takes a year or 2 for it to actually produce results. And if you're changing that next year, you've undermined everything that was positively happening for those kids and that staff, and you're just back to not square one, but you're really back to square -1. So you got to figure out how to keep the board stable, how to keep the superintendent stable, and have a sustained course of action over time. We know this from organizational development. The key to improvement is a sustained course of action over time. If you're churning through superintendents, stop it. Word's out already. The good superintendents don't want to come to your district. So then what happens, right? Pick one and stick with them. Pick one and stick with them, right? That Waters-Marzano meta-analysis showed in 2006 that even a mediocre superintendent, just an average run-of-the-mill superintendent, in the second year, student achievement was improving. Just keep a steady course of action over time, and your students will benefit for it. There's a time for a change, but you can't change all the time. Thomas said, when structures and norms of behavior within the school culture positively affect instructional practices, improved student achievement is expected and typical. The board's primary responsibility in the school district may be to establish and lead an effective district culture. I can't talk much more about that time-wise, but think about the priority of how you do things around here, right? That culture, whether it's inquisitive, whether it's positive, or whether it is rigid and accusatory and antagonistic. How do you do things around here? That's the board's responsibility. You're elected by your community, representing the owners of the schools, in order to develop and lead and enhance a positive culture in your school district. Culture is king. When we talked about perspectives, beliefs, attitudes, values, assumptions, now we want to get into capacity. What is this knowledge? What do we need to know? What do we need to understand? What skills, what motivation do we have in order to produce good results for our kids? This is Mary. In 2010, we brought her into a studio, wanted to capture her authentic voice to share, and perhaps there'll be another way to share this with you, but Mary's heart and her passion about this work was just absolutely phenomenal. And leading this multi-state effort, looking at school governance, spawning this lighthouse inquiry, which really began to take on a life of its own. Multiple states around the country are still engaged, involved in this Lighthouse Project work. in multiple areas. But really, the main thing is not hearing Mary's voice, but recognizing what her findings suggest. Beliefs, first of all, matter. Beliefs about student learning. Believing that all students can learn to a high level is paramount or a precondition for improving student achievement in your school district. If you don't believe they can, they can't. Setting clear expectations. We're going to delve into that just a little bit further into Ivan and Bill's work, and particularly looking at superintendent performance goals. The board has a responsibility for setting the conditions for success. One of the things that we find is, and Richard Elmore, one of the educational leaders in the country, writes about this. He calls it the reciprocity of accountability. If you manage someone, if you are a supervisor of someone, you have a responsibility to help push them, help lift them up to do good, deeper, more complex, more valuable work. Richard Elmore would say you also have an equal responsibility for ensuring they have the resources to do the work that you're asking them to do. If you're asking your superintendent to improve some area of the district, you have to work with him or her to ensure that they have the resources to do what it takes to meet that expectation. That's part of this conditions for success. Ultimately, boards in high-achieving districts have a high commitment to accountability for results. They're not just constantly passing people along. They're not like the district in the case study that says, oh, well, you've done an excellent job. We're not meeting our goals, but thank you for your service. Can we give you a raise? No. They're holding the system accountable through the superintendent. Building collective will speaks to the public advocacy piece, if you will. The community connections, the connections across the community, whether it's parents groups, business groups, whether it's working with your legislators or others to build the will for success. And ultimately, one of the things that Mary found statistically correlated to improving student learning in a school district is that the board and superintendent learn together as a team. Leaders are learners. You can tweet that. You can say Phil Gore said it, but probably somebody else said it long before I did. Leaders are learners. You can't lead a learning organization if you're not leading yourself. You're not learning yourself. Right? In order to lead, you have to learn. Real quickly, what are some things that a board member needs to learn about to be effective and leading their district? What? Policy. How to listen. How to listen. Yes, sir. How to work with the other school board members, because you only have one vote. Yes. How many people are on your board, sir? 5. So you had to learn to count to 3, right? Well, okay, I appreciate that, but you got to first learn how to count to 3. The lady I was talking about earlier, she's on a 9-person board. We've been trying to help her learn to count to 5. Maybe there's another way of looking at this, right? That's something we have to learn. It's not automatic. Most of us in our day jobs, in our families, in our life, we're used to being in charge. We're used to doing stuff. And then, wait a minute, I'm part of a collective here. I've got to figure out these people that I may not know, I may not like. I'm a mountain climber. I've climbed most of the highest peaks on the West Coast, and some strange circumstances from time to time. Every now and then you end up on a rope team with people you don't know, and even on a rope team with people you don't like. But the thing is, if they go down, you go down, because you're all tied together. And it's absolutely fascinating. Those people that are on a rope team going up a snow-covered peak, whether it's Mount Rainier or any of the others, every now and then you'll hear a story about somebody that untied from the rope. They didn't like the direction the team was going. They thought the team was going too fast. They thought the team was going too slow. They thought the team was going the wrong way. We don't know what they were thinking because they're dead. Time and time again, when you hear about a death in the mountains on the West Coast, it's somebody that thought they were going to go do their own thing their own way. I've often thought about school boards being kind of similar. You end up on a team of people that you may not know well, you may not like some of them, but it doesn't matter. You're there together, right? And you can't can't just walk off and do your own thing. Ivan Lawrenson and Bill McCaw, Bill's the guy in the foreground on the left, Ivan's the one, the larger man next to him there. Really good guys. They've been doing some solid work, and they're both, Ivan in particular is retired from work as a college administrator, again was a school board member for 20 years. They picked up on the learnings from the Lighthouse study, and they used this board self-assessment that we developed to take a look at what do school boards say they do, how are the students doing in their school district. These are the top 6 things. This study that Ivan has done, Ivan and Bill, and now it's kind of ongoing, expanding out to other states. The number one thing they saw, and this may sound kind of duh Ralph to some of you, but people get doctorate degrees for looking at this stuff. Maybe piled higher and deeper, someone said. The number one correlation they found between board action and student outcomes was specific goals for the superintendent about student achievement. It had a correlation coefficient of 0.71. So more than 70% of the time, if a board had specific performance goals for the superintendent tied to student learning outcomes, students were achieving higher in those districts. The other findings they had were that if the board communicates the expectations for the superintendent to the community, their students are likely to be achieving more. If the board bases decisions on the superintendent's contract on their performance against the goals, their students are likely to be achieving more. If the board collaborated with the greater community, the superintendent, and the staff when they developed the district plan is intentionally vague, because some districts it may be called a strategic plan, some it may be called a roadmap, some it may be called, what do you call it in your district? Long-range plan, strategic plan, comprehensive plan. There's different labels for it, so on the survey it just says district plan, but when the board collaborates with the community on the district plan, students are likely to achieve more. Rather than the board just sitting in the boardroom, coming up with a good plan, writing it down, and trying to drive the district with it. Basing the board work on the district plan or the district goals was also statistically correlated with improving student achievement. What are some easy ways that you could base your board work on your district plan? Easy ways. Yes, sir. Put it on the agenda, right? Put your district plan, your district goals on the agenda. Say more about that, somebody. Yep, and boards that have an agenda, that their action items are tied to their district plan, strategic plan. This is, goal 3, objective A, and this is why we're talking about it tonight. This is why it's important. Kind of articulating that to the community and to themselves, tying their actual business items to the district plan is an excellent practice. Bob? Every board meeting, having a presentation from the administration, updates on progress. This is closely tied to monitoring, right? So this is a status update on how we're doing on our strategic plan at every single meeting. Any other ideas? How might a board use their district plan and goals to drive the board's work? So they align board goals for how the board will improve, what the board's work will be with the district plans. There's a direct alignment. That's a great example. Yes, sir. Okay, so making decisions on allocating resources based on the goals in the plan, right? Yes, ma'am. Do you work in communications? No. Okay, but you get it. So using the language that's in the district plan or strategic plan and bringing that forward in every board meeting, in your discussion, in your deliberation, whatever language you've used. I don't think I've included in the PowerPoint the term non-negotiable goals. It tends to be a little stumbling point for some people. But if you have words like non-negotiable goals in your strategic plan, you would bring that out in your board meeting and it show up in your minutes. This is because we have a non-negotiable goal on reducing the achievement gap. Whatever those words are. It's a great example. These are great. These are good. I hope that you're hearing it and maybe thinking about, you might use that action planning guide when it gets to capacity and skills here, thinking about an action. What's an example, something that you could go home this next month and talk with your board about as a whole? Hey, I was at that Hot Topics conference, and we had this idea discussed of aligning our agendas with our district plan, or aligning our board goals with our district plan. How many of you in the room have goals for your board? Less than a majority. I want to encourage you to think about it. Not something that it's a whole separate list of things, but the question is, when I work with a board on developing goals for themselves, the question is, what will you as a board do this year? What will you do as a board to support the improvement or the progress on the strategic plan? What will you do as a board to support the work of the superintendent? What's your responsibility? Board goals are the place to frame what the board is going to do. On the governance level, right? On the governance level, how will we improve our governance this year? So monitoring progress toward the goals and the plan, this is kind of woven together. But all 6 of these areas are what I've been found to be statistically significant in what boards say they do and actually improving student achievement in the district. So we've been talking about this idea of knowledge and skills and developing capacity. I want to get into 2 specific areas of capacity building. 2 specific areas of capacity building. One is asking questions, asking good questions. Not asking a bad question, not an accusatory question, but asking a good question. What does that look like? Go with me in that case study, and let's turn to page 2. Let's go to reaction. I'm going to read that first paragraph just one time, and I want you to think with me, what's a good question that a board member might ask instead of an accusation? As the board reviewed the report, several members repeated their complaint that a number of math teachers were proposed for contract renewal each year, even though the superintendent was aware of the repeated complaints from parents about these teachers. One board member, to the acclaim of his colleagues, said he wanted to see performance appraisals for all of the secondary math teachers. He also wanted to know what percentage of the students in each teacher's classes had failed to meet standard on the state exam in math or Algebra 1 in the past years. When the superintendent asked why he wanted this information, the board member said he expected to see heads roll. At your tables, in the next 2 or 3 minutes, use the paper and pencils that were passed out earlier, pens. Write a question that this board member might ask instead of the accusation, instead of the jumping to conclusions, instead of the directive, instead of the inappropriate personnel discussion that follows. What's an example of a thoughtful, good question that the board could have asked? Take a couple minutes there and use that paper. Most of you are engaged in discussion, and I think that's wonderful. I'm hoping that you're coming up with, what's an example of a good question? Now, Sam's got the mic in the middle of the room or toward the back of the room there. And so she's looking for a young lady toward the front that will share a question. What's a question this board could ask?
What plan of action can we take to improve the performance of the teachers?
Excellent. Excellent. Very open-ended. What plan of action can we take to improve performance of teachers? Bob?
We were talking about the difference between the 2 types of questions you might ask. And in one situation you might say, or you might hear someone say, can you provide me with evidence of the improvement plans for our teachers? The other way you could say it is, how can we better support our teachers through our improvement plans?
Okay. Both would be appropriate kinds of questions, right? Can you provide me with evidence of improvement plans we have for our teachers? And that question of how can we as a team, as a governance team, support this work? Yes, sir.
What is the root cause and what's your basis for identifying that root cause?
Okay. Just asking the superintendent, putting it back. All the way in the back, they really want to say something.
What things do our outstanding teachers do to achieve results?
Excellent. What are the best practices in our district? What are those teachers doing differently that others could learn from? Peter?
Same question, but what are districts that districts in poverty that are succeeding at a high rate? What are they doing?
What are districts comparable to us? What are they doing to improve student learning? Right behind you, Sam.
From a superintendent's perspective, and going back to the example that's in the case study, the comment that's made or the question that's asked really displays a lack of trust, or what I see is that board member thinks that those evaluations are not being done appropriately. As a superintendent, I would want the board member to ask me that. Do you believe that our principals are evaluating teachers effectively? Do you believe that our evaluation system is actually having good results? And let me answer that question.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And then let's push a little deeper. So this is a problem in the case study. It's been going on for years. Things are not getting better. So clearly we're either doing the same old thing and expecting different results, or we're doing the wrong thing, or we're doing nothing. As a board member, I can stay in that curious zone for a while. But, you know, in the words of Ronald Reagan, there's that trust and then verify. Or what Stephen M. R. Covey in his second book, there was first the speed of trust and then blind trust. Like, what's a dutiful board member's responsibility if they've trusted for 2-3 years and not seen results? Now what do we do? How do we get there? What's the trust and then verify? Because I firmly believe we need to trust first. We want people to trust us. We need to extend that benevolent intent. And then if it's not happening, how do we ask a question, what's going on here? So we've got a situation where we're continuing to not have the results that we want, right? We want to demonstrate trust for the superintendent, and we feel our responsibility to verify that something is being done. How can we ask that question? What's an appropriate way to ask the question?
We can ask the superintendent to provide a process and a timeline for reporting to the board, updating the board on the progress based on the agreed upon outcomes and expectations.
Love it, right? So what evidence will you show us that improvement efforts are underway? And it's not just tonight at this open public meeting where we're stating we're not going to renew the math coordinator's contract and blah, blah, blah. But it's what process will you put in place, and when will you get back to us with evidence that improvement efforts are underway?
Money's not the solution to everything, but sometimes the adequate allocation of resources can make a big difference, and maybe that's impinging on the success of their math program.
That's great. Are we allocating enough resources, the right resources in the right way? And that goes with what the gentleman was saying about the process or the plan and how will we know, right? That needs to just be part of the conversation.
I'm glad I'm on the board with Michelle because I think in addition to assistance and support for the individual teachers, I would like to think as a board, before I said let their heads roll, I think an evaluation is more than just a test score for a teacher, as well as more than just the definition of a student.
Yeah, let's back it up a few years and say, are we preparing our 4th graders, 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th, 8th graders to be successful in 9th grade math in Algebra 1? What evidence, Mr. or Mrs. Superintendent, can you provide that we are giving adequate support in the earlier grades? I want you to think about this model that we've got up here on the screen. This is really one example of a continuous improvement model. Think, do, act, check. The idea, these are specific actions, and I had these listed as part of actions that we would take as board members. this is part of our role in this continuum of improving student achievement. First of all, we have to engage. If we're not reading the packet before the meeting, there's a different kind of problem. If our head's not in the game, we need to decide among ourselves. One of the funnest conference sessions I've ever done is entitled Know When to Hold 'Em, Know When to Fold 'Em. If you're not doing your job as a board member, it's time to get in or get out. Get in or get out. Don't waste your district's time and your kids' precious opportunities for learning, which are fairly limited and going to affect them and your community for the rest of their lives and ongoingly. Don't just occupy space and time because your board need a position or you like the status or you want to sell more homes or whatever it is that you benefit from being on the school board. Get in or get out. So the first step is engage. Now, folks, I was a preacher. I try not to preach much, but I'm feeling a little preachy. This is serious stuff. This is kids' lives on the line. We need to engage. We need to focus and look at the end game. What are we trying to accomplish by our school system? Why does your school district exist? What's the purpose of public education? What's our role in that at the governance level? How can we engage? It was said many times in different ways here when we think about the dispositions or mindsets or perspectives that we need to have. We need to be observers, seeking first to understand, observing. What's going on here? We look at data. Here's a piece of data. What's going on here? What do I see? Not what's the problem, who needs to be fired, how do we fix it? First of all, we have to observe. My dissertation was, again, on the factors and sources of information school boards consider when they evaluate a superintendent. That's too many words for a title. I apologize. We couldn't come up with something better. What are y'all thinking about when you evaluate the superintendent? Board members told me we're constantly observing. We're watching, is he or she prepared? Is he or she prepared for the meeting? Are the members of the public respecting our superintendent? Does the superintendent seem to care about his work? Is he curious about improving teaching and learning in our school district? Observing. Observation is really important. But we engage and we observe and then we decide. Right? We don't decide and then observe. We engage, observe, and then we decide. Very importantly, and this was coming out in the case study, is that we have to monitor for results. Once a decision's been made, how will we know whether we're meeting that goal, that objective? What evidence will there be? And ultimately, there needs to be adjustments. The superintendent of Seattle, Dr. Larry Nyland, a good friend of mine, co-authored Chapter 8 with me in this book. Larry Nyland, very seasoned. I don't want to guess at his age, but he's an older guy. He's been a professor. He's been non-renewed as a superintendent. He's been around. And Larry would say it takes 5 years to get the right goal stated. He's really kind of echoing Jim Collins from Built to Last, but the idea that we overshoot, we undershoot, we tweak it a little bit, we make adjustments. Don't think as a board member that you can just set an arbitrary target and your system will hit it. It needs to be an intentional target that's tied to your improvement efforts in professional development, your allocation of resources, the realities in your community, and the struggles among your students. You set a target, you figure out how we're going to help the students get there, but you're not going to non-renew this superintendent because you don't hit the target the first year, or perhaps the second year, maybe even the third. Because your goals, it takes about 5 years to get the right goal in place. Your level of understanding, your sophistication, the ability of the system to implement improvements, it just doesn't happen overnight. I recognize as a board member that's incredibly frustrating sometimes. But recognize this is a conversation about growth. It's a discussion for how can we improve as a system. We make adjustment. We stay engaged. This is the board's role for doing well. The board's role for doing well, actions we can take. I like this quote because I hope it gives hope to all of us. Do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Some of the things that you all wrote here earlier at the start of the workshop, what you hope to gain from this session, as a board chair, you would like to see if you can improve on your school board's effectiveness. Let me assure you, you can. Right? You can. And I'm hoping and trusting there's something in the tools, something in the studies, something in the interaction here that's prompting improvement for each and every one of us. Somebody wrote they want specific ideas about the school board's role regarding student achievement. Are you getting some specific ideas? You getting some specific things that you can do regarding your role in student achievement? Trying to get back to that Lawrenson slide. Some specific things you as a board can do related to student achievement. You want to hear about how school boards affect student outcomes because you don't necessarily receive data that reflects the difference the school board's making. I want you to recognize that even though it's not a direct impact, it's a serious impact that the school board makes. The conversation you have at the board table sets the tone for the relationships throughout the school district. The relationship that you have with your board superintendent, if it's collaborative, if it's inquisitive, if it's growth-oriented, will promote that kind of conversation between the superintendent and principals, the principals and teachers, the teachers and students, the teachers and families. The conversation you're having as a board and with the superintendent will affect everything throughout the system. These were 6 things found statistically significant that boards do that relates to improving student achievement. Somebody wrote they wanted to learn something new. Anybody learn anything new? Are we hitting that? Information you can take back. Are you getting some things you can take back and share with your fellow board members, maybe in a work session in your district or in a board meeting? Talk about what you've learned. I think that's critically important when you go off to some professional development. Your district pays for you to go, your registration fee, your travel. Come back to the board meeting and talk about what you learned. Talk about how you're thinking differently now as a board member. That's very important. More knowledge on being an effective board member. Several people wrote something like, one quick tip to bring back to the board that will help new and veteran board members redefine themselves. I want to get into this and then we'll just move into some open-ended questions. Let's get into setting superintendent performance goals. Again, this being the number one thing that related to improve student achievement in a district, something that truly only the board can do. The board together with the superintendent. The superintendent is your one direct employee. Is that right here in Virginia? You got some other employees directly as a board, maybe a general counsel or no? Some people are saying sort of, I'm going to leave it out there. Most districts, it's typical, there's just one direct employee, the superintendent. Sometimes the board might hire an auditor, or in Ohio, they actually hire the business manager. Not a practice that I encourage. But let's talk about what does a goal look like, a good goal for the superintendent. And the last exercise that I'm asking you to do here as a group, the last exercise I intend at this point to ask you to do as a group, is to develop a specific superintendent goal focused on student achievement. There's 2 blanks on this case study on page 3. The first is the specific goal. The second is the how would you know, the monitoring piece, the evidence piece. I'm going to suggest, from my experience in this, best case scenario, the superintendent drafts a set of goals, brings them to the board for the board's discussion, adapting, and adopting, right? So best case scenario, the superintendent, he or she is an instructional leader. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They should be able to present the board with a draft set of goals. Here's an idea. If you're hiring a superintendent in the next year or 2, Ask them to bring a draft set of goals to the interview. That'll say a lot about their awareness of whether they've done their homework and they know your district or not, and whether they know their role or not. They should be able to draft a set of goals for what they're going to accomplish in the first year. Best case scenario, the superintendent and his or her staff draft those goals, present them to the board for you to discuss, and to modify a little bit, to get your fingers into and your fingerprint on them. Superintendent shouldn't do it in isolation. You need to do it collaboratively. But think about, for this case study, go back and look at the data if you want to. Go back and look at that chart on page 1 or the table on page 2 and look at the trends and come up with your table either individually, ideally as a collective. What's a specific superintendent goal focused on student achievement, and how would you know if the superintendent was making progress toward that goal? I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes, and then Bob's going to come back and we'll do a little general question and answers on the things we've been talking about today. Okay?
We wanted to ensure that the achievement gap was being narrowed, but not because of the top coming down to the bottom. And so we wanted to make sure that the goal that the board set for the superintendent would be an increasing or a narrowing of the achievement gap, but so long as each of the different groups were increasing by some certain percentage.
So it might get more specific, more detailed, longer statement than just 80% of math students.
Right.
Yeah, okay, good. Making sure that all the groups are improving achievement. Yes. Someone else. What's a good example? This is not easy. What's a good example or a mediocre example? We got a lady here in the front, or we got a lady right there. Go ahead, you're first.
I pretty much said what Mr. Hunley said. Plan to improve each category as well as trying to figure out how to close the gap and provide teachers resources. In our school district, instructional coaches made a huge impact. So that would be something that I will, suggest. And then, observing the teachers that are doing good by the teachers that are not doing very well also was a strategy that worked very well in our county. So those were the suggestions over the setting the goals.
And you're kind of in the right ballpark. You're heading the right way. In January of this last year, I convened in Austin a group of national researchers on school governance, boards, and superintendents. And even though I was familiar with all of the folks and all of the studies, the one thing that really stood out to me that I'd learned kind of in a whole new level was the only thing that really matters is when we get specific. Right? We can all have this nebulous goal of let's improve our community engagement. Sounds good, seems like the right thing to do. What does it look like? What will we be able to know as a result of improving our community engagement? Will we measure it by a survey of community satisfaction? Will we measure it by something else? But until we get to the specificity, we're not doing anything good for our kids. We're just talking about it. So I don't want to squelch anybody else's comments here as we move forward, but I want to challenge you. Let's get specific. Sam, you got a specific, serious lady right there beside you.
I don't know about that, but using the data that was in this graph, we said that we would bring up the economically disadvantaged scores by 5%, because based on what we were looking at, the scores were kind of low. And the plan to attain it, we would address the benchmark data, make sure the teachers had unpacked the SOLs, and that we do PLCs, and that would be addressed in that. And then that.
So you dove into some strategies.
Yes.
Dove into some strategies, but you got the goal, and the goal was increase the percentage by 5% of the disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged students. And was that in 1 year, in 3 years, or in 5 years?
One.
In 1 year. Okay. All right. It's good. It's clear and specific. Yeah, and you'll know, right? The evidence, you'll know real clearly. Did you hit it or didn't you hit it? Yes, ma'am.
I'll preface all this by saying I've never done this before. So
That's good.
You gave me courage to speak when you asked about timeline, because I think it's important for us not to bite off more than we can chew and ask our superintendent to have to do that as well. So I said 70% of all students will pass, with emphasis on economically disadvantaged students achieving 65%, which would bring everyone up by 2017, which would, 18 really. And then the next year, 75% of all, with emphasis on economically disadvantaged to 70, which gives small amounts and time in order to do that. So you can applaud advancement and be realistic in what we expect our folks to do.
That's great. Many of you in the room are familiar with the acronym SMART goals. Strategic, specific. You hear them used a little bit interchangeably. Strategic or specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, or what's another R? Realistic's the most common. SMART goals, time-bound. We found in my school district, we had an incredible strategic plan. We had a retired Marine colonel that helped us develop that strategic plan. Our plan was snappy. Our mission statement was educate kids. I mean, this was a snappy plan. We had the plan in place for about 3 or 4 years, and nothing much was happening. And then a shift happened when we asked the superintendent to assign a person to be responsible for each one of our 5 strategic plan goals. And then they assigned staff to be responsible for the objectives and tasks within the plan, and all of a sudden, 99 tasks get checked off, and we're meeting our objectives and our goals. We're making progress. We improved our student achievement in 2 or 3 years' time higher than any of the 2 surrounding counties, King County and Snohomish County there in the Seattle area, than any other district, after we got real specific on both the time and then, okay, who's responsible for this? And it wasn't the board dictating that, but it was the board prodding the superintendent. We're not making any progress. Meet with Colonel Vitos and figure something out. Right? When they assigned somebody, they made it clear, they made it measurable. All of a sudden, progress started to happen. Sam? Somebody else? Anybody have a? Don't be too scared to share. This lady over here, she's super smart. We're learning. We're learning together. This is not a perfect science. If there was the perfect set of superintendent evaluation goals, we could just all pick them and adopt them, but it doesn't work that way. That's kind of like gluing wings on a worm and thinking it will fly, right? A caterpillar goes through a metamorphosis. The skill building here that we're talking about, us thinking about things differently, us developing the skill to develop a superintendent evaluation goal for our district is my hoped outcome here for this workshop today. That we are leaving here with the capacity, the will, the interest, and enough information that we can go back and talk with our board and superintendent and develop specific superintendent performance goals, because this is the big lever. This is the big one. If we can do this one, we will improve student achievement in our school districts. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Within the next school year, the superintendent will correlate data on struggling math students to demonstrate deficit areas and offer resources and remedial programs to increase those passing by 10%.
Okay. So we got a measurement there toward the end. We're weaving in between in those words goal and strategy. Goal and strategy. So I'll just say the strategy or the tactic is really the superintendent's responsibility. All right? The governance level is in setting that goal, holding the superintendent accountable for setting the goal, but it's fine because the superintendent might have drafted that himself or herself, right, and included some strategy in there, and that strategy then will help show the board, this is my intent, this is my progress. A savvy superintendent might have a board adopt a goal just like that, because that puts the executive endorsement of the board also on the strategy. Now, you may not want to be the endorser of the strategy. That's up to you as a board. It really is the superintendent's job to develop the strategy. But a savvy superintendent sometimes will have the board do that, because then they can go back and say, the board said we want to do this. Somebody else, another example of a goal is Justin. Bunch of A students up front here.
Well, one of the things that I really hate about these kind of Soviet 5-year plan approaches is by looking at, grade performance in every year, it ignores the fact that you're shuffling the deck, and this year's third grade is not last year's third grade.
It's about
and
cohort.
So, right, it's developing a cohort approach to see how, the third graders are progressing as fourth graders or progressing as fifth graders, so that you're tying, the arc of learning for specific students.
So how might you develop a goal around that?
Well, first of all, I would say let's measure things in a different way. Let's start not to look at how third grade does this year versus next year, but let's change our viewpoint to see how, kind of the Waldorf approach of having your ownership go with the progression of the class as they advance in the ranks. So first of all, just change that metric, and let's look at that, at how those students are doing in that fashion, and to make sure that they don't start out in the 50th percentile in year one and drop to the 40th in year two. I think that provides a better way to own it.
So look at the table on page 2 with me as Justin's talking. Let's think about how might a board work with a superintendent for a clear and specific goal that's talking about the students in third grade this year. How are they performing in fourth grade next year? Now, I've seen some kind of fuzzy goals out there that are like each student will make at least 1 year's progress throughout the year. It's kind of fuzzy because it's not tight enough in the bounds. It's not bounded in a way that you can really identify, are we getting there or not? But you might look at, in third grade, 2016, 66% of all students in third grade passed the state math test. The goal might be that next year's fourth grade class, at least 68 or at least 70. It needs to be realistic. So I don't know the capacity of your staff in your district. Hopefully your superintendent does. But you might be looking at a goal that says this group of students did that in 2016. Our expectation is, now we're setting goals for 2018 outcomes. Our expectation is that 70%, right? So great point. It's apples and oranges to compare 1 year's class with the next year's class sometimes. And I think we've seen that. In your graduating classes, if you've been in your district for a while, shaking a lot of hands, giving out a lot of diplomas, you got one graduating class, they're all social. They're all busybodies. They're all visiting with each other. They love each other. They're on Facebook all the time. They party together. They do this, that together. And then the next class, they're all nerdy. They're all academic. You got a bunch of scholars that are going through. In the next class, it might be all athletes, or that might be the predominant. So each class has a little different feel to it, but what are we doing with each class and each group of students? Anybody else, something else? Because that was a really important point, that trend data, cohort data, getting things down to each and every student takes a deeper dive. Yes, sir. Just keeping you getting your exercise, Sam.
I would want our superintendent to create an environment that establishes a community of learning where people want to be. And so apart from just academic performance, I would like for the superintendent to take a look at all the surrounding jurisdictions of similar economic standing and find out what their teacher retention rates are, and set a goal to have the best teacher retention rate in your area. And also look at student attendance rates and see the surrounding attendance rates, and have your district have the best attendance rate. Because when your teachers and your students are showing up and coming back year after year, then you've got that better chance of establishing that community of learning that's going to function.
You're on to something important, and the important piece is you're talking about a leading indicator instead of a lagging indicator, right? You're talking about what are those predictors of future success, and how do we as a board and a system pay attention to indicators of how our students will be doing in the future. So a healthy system has the appropriate amount of teacher retention. It's always going to have some turnover. It's not going to be healthy. There's no healthy system where everything stays the same, closed, if you will. But so there needs to be some turnover. What is that percentage? That's different than a student academic or outcome goal, but it's an important predictor. You touched on a couple other things. Student attendance being one. So student attendance is a predictor of student success, right? Some of you engage with me on this just a minute, because I think we can take away some specific takeaways from this piece of conversation that are different than what might be in my PowerPoint. Teacher attendance correlates with improved student achievement. Teacher attendance, teacher morale, the climate, so on and so forth. Hopefully your strategic plan, district plan, has specifics about morale, climate, being a desirable workplace, that kind of stuff. Again, you got to get specific with it for it to be actionable. It can't just be the fuzzy, happy cows give happy milk or something like that. You know, you see some of those book titles. It can't be that fuzzy. It's got to be a little bit more specific. But teacher attendance, student attendance. What else is a big predictor of student success? Dropout rate, parent involvement. High classroom supports can overcome the worst of family environments. We got to accept that. That research is clear. Catherine Snow from Harvard has put it out there, published in about 1991 or 96. Happy to share the direct link. But high classroom supports can overcome the worst of lack of home support. On the flip side of that, low classroom support can actually hinder the students that come from the best of backgrounds, if you will, the most advantageous backgrounds. But looking at student discipline rates is a big deal. It's a really big predictor. We know that if a student is not on grade level in reading comprehension in 3rd grade, they're probably not going to graduate from high school. Generally in K-12, we spend the first 3 to 4 years teaching kids how to read, and the rest of their career they're reading to learn. So they learn to read, then they read to learn. If they didn't learn to read, we got to figure out how in 4th grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade, whatever grade it is, that in social studies, history class, health class, PE, science class, that everybody becomes a reading teacher. One of the most disturbing facts that I think you can find as predictor of a student not succeeding: uncorrected bad eyesight. According to the United Way, they've done a lot of work on improving opportunities for eyesight for children. They say that the #1 predictor of whether somebody is on death row was uncorrected eyesight. I was one of those kids. Started kindergarten, my parents took me to a local optometrist. He looked at my eyes, had me do some ABC thing on a chart, said my eyes were fine. My 1st grade teacher said, "I think there's something wrong with that boy's eyes. He squints a lot." Fact was, I had a lazy eye that kind of did its own thing, and severe astigmatism in both eyes, and couldn't read the chalkboard at all. And I came from an educated, fairly, I guess I thought we were in poverty, but by other standards, we're probably very affluent. My mom's a nurse, an RN. I'd had bad eyesight all the way up till 1st grade, and nobody picked up on it. My dad just wondered why I kept riding into the barn on the bicycle. That's true, actually. You know, I could have been one of those kids, but fortunately the 1st grade teacher sent me, the system was wealthy enough, appropriate enough that it had a school nurse, sent me to the school nurse. She said, "Yeah, that boy can't see. He needs to go to an ophthalmologist." I went to an ophthalmologist in the big city and ended up with a patch and correction and so forth. I can't really imagine where my life would have been if I hadn't learned to read 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. big predictor. Can your kids see? Can they hear? There are those leading indicators, getting back to that point, that are long before test score data, which is really just summative. It's too late. They passed the test or they didn't. Teacher attendance is a big one. Student attendance is a big one. Student discipline. If the kid's sitting in detention, they're probably not getting instruction. One of the craziest practices we have in most states is if a kid skips school, they get suspended. Whose interest does that serve? You know, doesn't help the kid any. What were we thinking when we suspend kids that skip school? Y'all do that in your districts? They skip school, you suspend them? Not in Virginia. In Texas, we put them in jail. Yeah, it's the truth. We got the highest graduation rates in the country. Because if they don't go to school, they go to jail. I'm not a huge fan of the idea, but it seems to do something good. Yes, ma'am? Nice. I hope everybody heard her. That, you know, tardiness, just being late, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is, can be a predictor of a student not being successful. Yes, George?
You mentioned it earlier about teacher turnover. We've had a problem where a whole department was new coming in and with no experience whatsoever. And this hurt our scores very, very much.
Sure.
And being in an area where there's more money within 20 and 30 miles from where we are, they're going to take off and go there. And the other thing that's impressed me is that teachers are not like they used to be. A lot of these kids coming in to teach this day and time are going to be here 1 or 2, maybe 3 years, and hey, I don't like this, or I can do better somewhere else, and they're gone. And keeping teachers there and happy and paying them is a big thing on student progress. Simple as that.
It's a good point. Your district needs to come together with a strategy to fix that. What can you do?
Everything we can, but put cuffs on them. I mean, you know, especially we have more problems with our middle school because of this.
Yeah.
And that's such an important age group. You know that.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
So we're trying to keep the salaries and the perks comparable to our surrounding areas and so forth and all, and giving them a good atmosphere to work in and all. But still, if you're brand new and you're coming into a middle school, that's rough. To me, that's the roughest part of the whole educational process.
That's a good point, George. Just to share, you got to have something about the teacher retention as a focus, and every district's a little different in their strategy and ability to do that. Yes, sir.
I went to a presentation at NSBA from the Denver School Board, and they strategically said they wanted to cut down on suspensions. And over a 5-year period, their number of suspensions went from over 12,000 to less than 5,000. So that's a case where the board set a goal and a priority, and it made a tremendous difference in student outcomes.
I think that's a good segue here, because boards have more power than they realize. And the things that you talk about at the board table, they have a ripple effect throughout the system. The things that you talk about and the way that you talk about governance and issues and concerns has a ripple effect. Part of it is really as simple as seeing the glass half full or half empty. And the defeatism of seeing the glass half empty, that pessimism, if you will, becomes contagious. However, articulating that your students can learn, your teachers can teach, your superintendent can administrate, having confidence in the system and holding the system accountable for that expectations will also create a ripple effect in the culture that results in good things for kids. I want to bring a couple things to closure. I hope you've got some ideas. We didn't get into the monitoring much because the reality is a goal about your state summative test at the end of the year isn't going to get you to the results for improvement that you need. You're going to have some formative assessment throughout the year. If the goal is 2 or 3 or 5% more passing your state test, what evidence are you going to see from the superintendent quarterly to suggest that you're on track to meet that goal? And every district's different. What your classroom-based assessments are, what other test of skills you may use, whether it's California Achievement Test, Iowa Test of Basic Skills, DIBELS out of Oregon, whatever the test is and the methods, you need to see some monitoring progress throughout the year, not just waiting till the end of the year and say, oh, we got there, we didn't get there. That's not responsible governance. Thinking to your action plan, I want to encourage you to take just a moment, write something in that bottom right box. Write something in that bottom right box. What can you do differently when you go back home to your district this next month? What might your district consider collaborating on, whether it's with superintendent goals, whether it's a discussion about data, disaggregating data, asking questions about teacher retention? There's a lot of ideas are emerging here. Finding out how your students are doing, if they're on grade level in reading comprehension in 2nd grade, 3rd grade. Those are big predictors of lifelong success. We all want each and every student to have lifelong success. If they're not reading on grade level in 2nd and 3rd grade, they're very likely not to have lifelong success. What questions might you ask? What discussions might you have with your board, with your superintendent? What can you do differently when you get back home? I've said to you very strongly once or twice, it is absolutely paramount that your board and superintendent learn as a team. I realize that in a workshop like this, it's not reasonable or feasible that many of you could have come as a whole board and a superintendent team, but if you came with a partner or two, you're probably ahead of the curve because you've got 1 or 2 less people that you have to try to convince something of when you go back home to improve. As a director of board development in my first couple years, we used to encourage boards in a new board orientation. We'd encourage those new board members, now go through the program, talk with your board, pick which sessions you go to, they go to, this one goes to, that goes to. You know what that results in? Nothing. You have to come back and sell 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other people on whatever idea that you had. When you go to a conference, as much as you can, go as a whole board superintendent team. When you go to your state convention, show up as a collective so you're having a shared learning experience. Bring in somebody from VSBA to facilitate conversations and do workshops for you, a consultant that can help you clarify and fine-tune the work of your board superintendent team, especially when it comes to those performance goals. That's tough stuff. I think we're going to see Mary Delagardelle for 2 minutes or less. I just want you to hear and know her heart. Absolutely phenomenal person who is very significant part of ongoing learning that's happening across the country on what school boards do that make a difference for kids.
And the only way you can have, as I said, a consistent process is by knowing the rules. And the only way you can know the rules to where you can do them as easy as breathing is to be able to go to trainings together. And that's why I really appreciate when we do the Team of 8 training, because we all heard the same thing and we're able to go back and practice it. And we're able to say, okay, remember, Gloria, this is what was said there, and I feel comfortable saying, well, Lisa, remember, this is what they told us. So I feel that by doing that, we establish good values, we have a clear vision, and we're able to have examples of how we do business, because it's like the new way of doing things. And there's always room for adjustments and improvements.
Learning as a team is the way to improve student learning in your district. It's the #1 thing you can do, is to learn together as a team. We've talked today about perspectives, our beliefs, attitudes, values, assumptions. We didn't drill down into that a lot, but I gave you 4 ideas that you might consider: perspectives around trust, curiosity, forward focus, and possibility. Much of what we talked about today had a sense of possibility to it. Do we believe that all students can learn, and to what level is really foundational as part of what Mary found in the Lighthouse studies, that key connection between board members' beliefs and actual student learning. It's our responsibility to develop the knowledge, the skills, the understanding, and the will to do the work. Serving on a school board is an honor, but it's also a great responsibility. I think it behooves us, that onus falls on us. Will we govern well? Will we govern well? Will we choose to do our homework, to ask good questions, to set our personal agendas aside, to listen for understanding, and be open? Will we be open that maybe there is a different way of doing this than what we would have thought of? I think that's critical. The actions that we take, that idea of engaging, deliberating at the board table, talking about student achievement, talking about initiatives to improve student achievement, you can tell a whole lot about the direction of a school district by the conversation the board is having at the table, with themselves and together with the superintendent. For a lot of boards, they spend more time talking about whether to have artificial turf or regular turf than they do about how the students are doing in the district. It's so easy to be busy about the wrong things and think that we've done a good job. I want to encourage you to think about, when you go back to your next board meeting, what's on the agenda? What are your fellow board members talking about? And how might you just make an incremental shift that has a focus on how are the students doing in our district? How might you do, as some districts have done, make the main thing the first thing? One district I worked with this last year, at the start of every single public board meeting, they meet once a month in a public board business meeting. And at every one, they have a report on student achievement at the beginning of the agenda. They say the pledge, they open the meeting, and they go into a report on student achievement. Assistant Superintendent for Student Achievement comes and makes a presentation. It's interactive. They use Poll Everywhere. They use a device so that people in the audience, parents, students, together with the board members, can interact and vote and see their responses on screen and be engaged in the conversation before they have the community members tell them all the things they're doing wrong, before they have the mind-numbing reports on enrollment data and other kinds of numbers that many of us sort of glaze over. It's like, yeah, I guess that's important, but why are we spending board meeting time on it? Before they have all that happen and it's late and 2-3 hours into the meeting, they talk about student achievement. What might it be if you're the board president here today and you started your meetings with a discussion about student achievement? An anecdote, an observation, a piece of data. I noticed on the recent 3rd grade, 7th grade, 10th grade, whatever it was, just some statement that kind of makes the main thing the first thing. Something for you to think about. Your actions do matter, and you need to monitor your work. This is probably, as a board member, where we fall the most short. It certainly ties in with superintendent evaluation, which needs to be a conversation about growth. But are we monitoring the effectiveness of the programs that we vote and approve? Are we monitoring them for what their results are? Are we having the conversation with the superintendent about progress, about improvement? Or are we avoiding tough conversations because we don't know how to have them productively? Those are some questions, some thoughts that I just wanted to leave you with. You know, Bob's going to come. I believe in facilitate. If there's any further questions and answers, happy to talk with you, share with you some thoughts or resources that we can. Bob?
Thanks very much, Phil, and I think I speak for everybody. I think we owe Phil a debt of gratitude and really would like to show you our appreciation. I think I can speak personally. I've been coming to these conferences since 2004, And I think today I probably got as much out of one of our Hot Topic conferences as I've ever gotten. So thank you very much. Before I close, a few reminders. The VSBA webinar, Improving Education Services for Children and Youth with ASD and Public School Divisions through VCU Autism Center for Excellence, will take place May 17th. You can register for the webinar on the VSBA website. The VSBA School Law Conference will be held Friday, June 2nd at the Hilton Short Pump in Richmond. And the VSBA Conference on Education will be held July 18th at the Richmond Marriott. We encourage you to attend these events and to bring another board member with you. One thing I would also like to mention, this came to me while we were talking. Gina mentioned the fact that several of the articles that Phil mentioned are on the VSBA website. One of the things that occurred to me was the practice of taking some of the VSBA website opportunities that you may not have considered in the past. One of them is our process for getting, remind me the exact name of it, Gina, the Award of Excellence or the Award of Distinction for the board. Even if you choose not to go through the entire process of submitting an award of distinction for your board, I would encourage you to go through that submittal application as a board and take a look at the elements of that. That will give you a lot of specifics that you might consider doing as a board that you might not have thought about before. And at one point, you might decide, hey, this is something that we ought to submit for each year. It is a fair amount of work involved, but I think each of those are specific items that we could all take away from to improve the governance of our particular boards. Lunch is available in the foyer, and you can bring it back in this room with you to enjoy. Have a safe journey home, and thank you again for the work you are doing as leaders, advocates, and supporters of public education. Consider this meeting adjourned at the conclusion of, one more question. Questions. So more questions for Phil at this point. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon. You encouraged boards to train together and travel together. Do you have any techniques for encouraging boards to actually do that?
Well, let me back up. You didn't ask this, but one thing that I found as a board president that the law allowed in the state of Washington, and I would assume it allows here in Virginia, we would meet informally. We would announce it so that there was no appearance of impropriety or violating our Open Meetings Act in Washington. But we would meet as a board. Often we had a period of time, a couple years, where we would meet once a month for breakfast. We were not making any decisions on district business. We were getting to know each other. And it was an open, public place, a restaurant. It's discouraged because it looks bad? Okay, so I appreciate that. What about getting together for holiday parties and stuff like that? Is that discouraged too? Yeah, it can be real slippery. Well, talk with your association about that, because what works in one state, the laws are they all vary, those sunshine laws, from place to place. How do you get a board member, I think at the heart of your question, how do you get a board member that thinks they don't need to learn anything? How do you get them to come? I think there are some practical things. Again, what Mary had in the Lighthouse study, what the purpose of this exercise right here, doing that as a board, you could have Sam or somebody from the association probably come facilitate that for your board. The intent is to build a sense of urgency. If somebody from the association came and they did that with your board, I don't know if it's 5 members, 7 members, whatever, superintendent participates. The question is, again, what percentage of our students are at or above grade level? What percentage of our students could we expect to be at or above grade level with the right support? And then where's this gap? A person could come in and know what your at least state assessment data showed, what your graduation rate showed, and just talk about that gap. So the intent would be to create a sense of urgency. I understand, I've met a lot of board members through the years. Some of them have been on the board for a long time, and they don't have a sense of urgency. their kids did fine back in 1972, and so everybody else's kids should be too if they just work hard enough, right? Somehow you have to catalyze that urgency. It's what about this kid? What about her? It has to be personal, right? It has to be something that grabs their heart. And hearts are hard to change sometimes. I sort of left that work a few years back. But yeah, how do you deal with a person's heart when it's just not where it should be? I would say too, don't give up. Hammer on it, hammer on it, hammer on it. Go back and talk with your board this week. This is what I learned at the Hot Topic Conference in Charlottesville. This is what I learned. This is what we learned. This is why this is important. So I think you can whet the appetite, prime the pump. If they could learn together in district, sometimes people legitimately cannot travel. They either have physical handicaps, they're caring for an invalid, they're a sole proprietor of a business or something. So there are some people, and it might be as many as 10 to 12% of board members nationally, they absolutely cannot travel. Blood clots in their legs. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories down through the years. So what can you do in the district? What can you do with a book study? There's a great little book that Nancy Walser wrote 8 or 9 years ago called The Effective School Board Book. It's small, it's pithy, it's got an orange cover on it. The Effective School Board Book is real easy for a board to go through kind of chapter by chapter. That's what Tom and I had intended in our book, is that it would be a once-a-month chapter. So maybe there's other ways to learn together as a team, and they really can't go to a conference. I don't know your board members.
There was I think it was the Milagro Beanfield War. There was a quote there that if we haven't learned it by now, we probably don't need to know it. And I think sometimes that's how boards act. If we're working, we're doing fine, aren't we? How much time would you say a board should devote to the care and feeding of its processes and its governance?
Of itself. That's a great question. It deals with the culture of the board, their time, their availability, how many meetings. How many times do you all meet here a month already in Virginia? How many board meetings does a typical board? 2 times, 3 times?
2 or 1.
So partly it's a question of how do you add something on or how do you embed it. We all have a limited amount of time. So what is it you're now doing that you wouldn't have to do? How much of your business could be condensed so that 20 or 30 minutes at a regular board meeting was about the board learning? How much could you do a book study where you went through a chapter like this and talked about it for 20 or 30 minutes in a board meeting? Can you make it embedded? One of the things that we know about teacher professional development that works, it's all job embedded. It's not something they go off to a seminar and it's separate and disconnected from the school year, but it's during the school year. Here's a great practice happening in this classroom. Here's a practice I could apply in my classroom. I think it's the same for board members. Right? How could we improve our governance? One other little thing. Here's a practice I highly encourage. Assign somebody on your board at the end of every meeting to give a 5-minute assessment of how they think the meeting went. If you're the board president, rotate it around. Do it publicly. How did the meeting go? Were all voices heard? Did we get the information in advance that we needed in order to make the decisions we were asked to make tonight? There's some assessment tools your association can put you in touch with, but a simple little 5, 6, 7 questions. Did everybody say what they needed to say? Was there anybody withholding? They had something that they really wanted to share, and either the board chair moved on or they decided not to share it. You can improve your practice as part of your practice. And again, that practice, some of you are already doing it where your board business is tied to the strategic plan already. Excellent practice, excellent best practice. As part of that evaluation, were we talking about things that are not part of our goals? Were we sidetracked by a faction or an incident? Was it intentional or did we get off track? Anyway, thanks for the question. You guys are great. Thank you again for your service. Appreciate you all.